Recruiting doesn't stop just because the season's underway. There's a lot going on in Tuscaloosa right now. This is Way Offsides. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the case may be. Welcome to a Way Offsides pop-up. Before we get started, if you're an Alabama fan, you're probably scrounging around the internet, looking on the YouTube, trying to find every bit of information regarding your beloved Crimson Tide. Well, folks, I'm happy to tell you, you found the cornucopia of Alabama information, fan opinions, recruiting updates, reactions, live reactions, interviews, everything you need to keep up to date with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Football, baseball, basketball, gymnastics, a little bit of golf, maybe even some soccer, who knows. It's all here. So do yourself a favor, and before you do anything else, you've got to hit the subscribe button. You've got to hit that and the notification button while you're at it. Also, give this video a like, leave a comment, tell us how we're doing, tell us what you think. Do we suck? Do we need to do something else? If you're an Alabama fan, I fully 100% expect you to tell us we suck. That's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. Doesn't mean you're right. Doesn't mean you're wrong. But the reason you're here is to talk recruiting. The 2024 college football season is officially underway, and Alabama is 1-0. They convincingly beat the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. What the hell's a Hilltopper anyway? 63-0, and put on an offensive showcase as well as a defensive clinic with this new swarm defense. A lot of players were in attendance, including Micah DeBose, players like that. A lot of 26, 27 guys were in attendance for that game. Now, but if you're on Twitter, specifically X, the hot recruiting topics have been Auburn, Deuce Knight, Naeem Offord, players like that. But in terms of Alabama, the news has been about current. I got something on my shoulder here. Current Bama commits taking visits. The first one being 5-star wide receiver Caleb Cunningham, who visited Ole Miss during their, 77-0 rout of Furman, the mighty Furman of Furman. Where the hell's Furman? But anyway, Caleb Cunningham visited Ole Miss during their offensive explosion against Furman during week 1. A lot of people had a lot to say about that. Of course, Auburn fans, anytime they see it, hey, he's going to flip, they're convinced that Caleb Cunningham is going to flip to Auburn and he's just trolling Alabama. I don't know why they think that. Anyway, Caleb has come out since then in comment sections on social media and been like, hey, relax. Bama's home. I believe that he will actually be in Tuscaloosa this weekend for the South Florida game, which we can expect to be a utter massacre. Potential bloodshed on the horizon, folks. After last year's debacle in South Florida and all the talk from their head coach right before the season started and everything that's gone on, you can expect Alabama to relentlessly step on their throat until their faces turn as green as their uniform tops. It's going to be nasty. But anyway, so other big one, Dawson Merritt, 4-star linebacker. Dawson Merritt, he committed to Alabama back in June or July. I can't remember. Big get for Kane Womack's Wolf position. Is a very important position in his defense. Dawson Merritt fits it perfectly. Chose the Tide over over Nebraska. Now, he is taking a visit to Nebraska, and everybody that has connections to that recruiting cycle or particular recruit or whatever, has said that NIL is playing a role in his decision to visit the Cornhuskers, and that they have upped their NIL ante in a last-minute attempt to lure Dawson Merritt back to Nebraska from Alabama. I will remind you guys that Merritt, that's a lot of talk. It's a lot of talk by people who don't really have an in with Merritt. But if you look at it, take a step back and look at it externally, Dawson Merritt's from Kansas, heavily being recruited by Nebraska. It's got a lot of people who are committed to Nebraska, a lot of friends. Also, there's the simple fact that Nebraska is playing one Colorado, and that will be the game that Merritt visits. Obviously, the allure of a Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, those kind of guys. I would venture to say, I don't know this for sure, but I would venture to say that Merritt is likely taking that visit as a free opportunity to see those people in person. And if you're a 18-year-old kid who plays football and football is likely your life, your identity, why would you not? We're talking about two potential first rounders, obviously prime time's a head coach. Despite what you think about Colorado, you all know my feelings about him if you're subscribed and see our videos. I mean, it is a very dynamic staff and team that demands a lot of attention, and the media gives it to them. And so these kids who consume that media, they want to go see them live. And I can understand that. There's a swag there. There's a vibe there that kids want to see and be a part of. So I don't expect there to be a legitimate flip from Dawson Merritt, but with NIL in play, it's hard to say no for certain. Time will tell. Now, the season is, as we all know this, everybody who watches college football, before we know it, we're going to be 4 or 5 games deep into this season, with week 5 for Alabama being a very important recruiting week. Why, Cotton? Why? What's going on in week 5? Well, if you don't know, I don't know how to help you, because obviously that's the week that Georgia comes to town, and likely that will be it will definitely likely be a top 5 showdown, could be a top 3, could potentially be a top 2 showdown in Tuscaloosa. You may get a preview of your national championship early. You may get a preview of your SEC championship early. We'll see what happens, but there will be a ton of 2025 guys, some that are already committed to Alabama, some that Alabama is targeting heavily, who will be in the stadium for that game. I would imagine that some people we've already said their names will be there for that game as well. But 3 big ones right off the bat. Jordan Young, the NC State commit. This is a safety, 4-star safety that Alabama has been targeting heavily. Did commit to NC State a few weeks ago, but he will be there for the Alabama-Georgia game. On top of that, Florida linebacker, 4-star linebacker Ty Jackson will also be there for the Georgia-Alabama game. The big one that everybody's waiting on is 5-star Justice Terry, defensive lineman out of Georgia, was committed to Georgia, decommitted, then committed to USC, decommitted, and right after that, everybody crystal balled him right back to Georgia, and he took an official visit to Alabama that weekend. Mama Terry, who we affectionately love, absolutely enjoyed her visit in Tuscaloosa, but he did visit Georgia not long ago. I believe he was in Georgia he was in Atlanta for the Clemson game. So we'll see. That could be a case of him wanting to see Georgia play top-tier talent on the road before he makes that commitment. But he is holding out until signing day, is what he said. That could change until he makes his actual commitment to the University of Georgia or the University of Alabama. Those are the 2 big players there. I believe heavily that Alabama is still making a very strong push for Justice Terry. I think he would be a cherry on top for their number 2 class right now. But I do believe he's probably leaning heavily Georgia. We'll see what happens. I don't know if you start getting into the realm of Georgia, Alabama. I don't know. I'm sure there's NIL there in play, but I don't think it's to the extent of what some other schools are throwing at recruits, just because Alabama and Georgia are 2 schools who, yes, they will pay a player, but they're going to pay a player and offer a unique opportunity for NFL development, which some schools just can't do that. It's interesting to me that Ohio State, schools like Ohio State and LSU have to offer big NIL deals because they too can tout that they can produce NFL talent. They've done it. But Alabama and Georgia, although they certainly are using NIL to get players, don't get it twisted here. They have a lot more to sell other than just an NIL package, unlike some schools. Throw up the O's. Anyway, moving forward. Right now, in terms of overall recruiting, as much as you don't want to hear me say it, Auburn is on fire. They are throwing around a lot of money. They've got some flips probably coming after their amazing blowout win of Alabama A&M, where they hosted a ton of recruits. I will say this, and I've been saying this for months now, as the season progresses, things are going to change dramatically. As teams win and lose, we saw it with the Miami Florida game. Florida hosted a ton of recruits for that game, and they laid a big old stinky egg. And the Miami players were over jaw-jacking at these recruits. That seems insignificant. It should seem insignificant in the decision and commitment to play at a school, but it does have an immediate impact because all of a sudden to those, especially those in-state kids who want to stay in state, Miami, with what Florida State's doing right now, they've lost their first two. Florida looks like they're going to be lucky to win 3 or 4. In-state kids see that, and Miami's the play. If you want to go to the big dogs, Miami seems to be the play, that USF or UCF. So, that Georgia-Alabama game, in that sense, does become very, very important. What does a Justice Terry think in picking between those two schools if Georgia shows up in Tuscaloosa and gets beat? Is Georgia still the play? Let's be honest. If Alabama wins that game, I don't know that it's going to be a blowout. I think that they could win by 7-10. So if Georgia is competitive, is that enough to keep Terry there? Or is Terry been leaning Alabama this whole time and he's just taking visits to Georgia because that's where he's from? It's hard to tell, but you follow the visits, and in following those visits, Terry has been leaning Georgia. And so we'll see what happens there with Justice Terry. But I do think that Alabama is the favorite right now for Ty Jackson. That would be a very big get, especially with the decommitment of Jaden Harmon, who now is verbally committed to Tennessee. Can't blame him. He went and got a bag. Can't really blame him. But that's it. Other than that, there's not much going on, except that, look, Auburn is paying a lot of players right now, and they may finish with a top 3 class. They may not once they start losing football games. Some of these, there are a lot of rumors out there, and these are rumors. I'm not verifying any of this information, that Auburn is paying people for commitments, for verbal commitments. It kind of makes sense if somebody verbally commits. Other people want to be part of that. If you get a guy like Deuce Knight to commit, then hopefully that pulls in a couple of other talented receivers and offensive players who want to play with him. So we'll see. We'll really see what's happening. I'm not saying that's what's happening at Auburn. I will say that Auburn is definitely spending a ton of money right now. But as Nick Saban said, you got to be careful and make sure you're paying the right guys, or else you're shit up a creek, right? Isn't that the saying? He said something different, but in terms of recruiting, there's not a ton going on except for visits happening during the game. And there's going to be more Alabama commitments that go visit other schools for other games. There's going to be a lot of guys who visit Alabama who have no interest in actually committing to Alabama. That's just the way this works. If you're an 18-year-old kid and you get an offer to go see a free football game, free food, all these things, why would you not go to? I mean, if you're being honest with yourself, if you're a college football fan, you would likely go, right? I would. And so a lot of this is going to start to even itself out around November. Towards the end of the regular season, we'll start to see who's actually going to stick with their commitments, who's going to go here, who's going to go there. And I think that the top 5 will dramatically shake up. I think Alabama, if they would have to flip a couple of guys. They would have a legitimate shot at that number 1, but I think it's either going to finish with Bama at 2 or 3, potentially 4, Georgia or Ohio State at 1. And there is, I will tell you, Alabama fans, prepare yourselves. There is the possibility that Auburn finishes ahead of Alabama in the recruiting class. I don't think it's likely based off of the overall value and average of the guys that Alabama's recruiting. But if guys continue to flip, that's a possibility. I will say it seems like, despite all the smoke around Anthony Turbo Rogers, he's sticking with Bama. He's been very loud about that during his Friday night games, which is very interesting because Bama did just pick up the commitment from 4-star. Some people have him as a 5-star, AK Deer. So that is it. That's all that's going on in the world of recruiting. A lot of visits. Nothing is set in stone. A lot of things are going to shake up and change before December. So when those other fans come chirping and barking in your ear, just wait, because eventually what goes up always comes down. Everything works on a curve, folks. So until next time, as always, say your prayers, wash your hands, read your Bibles, horns down, beat Auburn and LSU and Tennessee too. Roll Tide.